Next we move under the hood. Wiring, metal tubing, hoses, and clamps. First you open the hood. First thing under the hood, I would check my wiring, metal tubing, hoses and clamps for any cracks, breaks, leaks, dry rot, bubbles or tears, and that all items are secure in place with proper bolts and screws. Then I would say I would check the other side the same way from the firewall throughout the engine. Next we'll check our radiator overflow, washer fluid container, alternator, serpentine belt, and water pump. In checking the radiator overflow container, I'd check the coolant with a sight glass if equipped. If not equipped with a sight glass, I'd remove the radiator reservoir cap when the engine is cool. The fluid level should be at least half full. The radiator overflow is not cracked, broken, or leaking. All bolts and screws appear to be present, and it is secure to the bus. At this time, we'll check that our hoses are securely clamped and attached, and the hoses are not split, cracked, or broken, or showing signs of dry rot, bubbles, or tears. Next, we'll check our washer fluid container. We'll check that the container is not cracked, broken, or leaking, and that all screws and bolts appear to be present and the item is secure to the bus. It should be at least half full. We should also check the electrical connections, making sure that they are not split, cracked, or broken, and are not frayed or wires exposed. Next, we'll check our rubber hose connection, making sure it's not split, cracked, broken, or frayed, no dry rot, and that it is securely attached with no apparent leakage. Next, we'll check the alternator, serpentine belt, and the water pump. The alternator is not cracked, broken, welded, or worn. The engine is belt driven. The belt is not cracked, broken, dry rotted, or frayed. There should be no more than 3/4 of an inch in play in the belt. The water pump is not cracked, broken, or leaking. And the rubber tubing is not split, cracked, or broken, or leaking, and is connected with the proper clamps. All the bolts and screws in the alternator, serpentine belt, and the water pump appear to be present, and the items are secure to the bus. Next, we'll check our frame. The frame appears to be straight. No holes other than the manufacturing holes should be present. The frame doesn't have any wells, cracks, and isn't worn, and is properly secured to the bus with its bolts. Be sure to say, I would check the frame on the other side of the bus in the engine compartment to the rear the same way. Next, we'll check our 2 spring mounts, shock, leaf springs, U-bolts, axle, tie rod ends with bolt and cotter pins. Check the leaf spring mounts front and rear for any missing bolts. None are broken, no cracks, well greased, and for secureness. Check for missing or damaged bushings. Next, we'll check the front leaf springs for shifted, broken, or cracked leaves, that all are aligned properly, that none are missing, that U-bolts and connectors are secure, none missing or loose. Next, we'll check that our shocks are securely mounted, there are no missing bolts, top or bottom, and no leaks. Next, we'll check the tie rod and the tie rod ends for any missing bolts, and make sure the cotter pin is in place. No cracks and well greased. Don't forget to mention that the axle has no cracks, breaks, wells, and is secure with bolts and isn't worn. I would check the other side of the engine compartment the same way. Check the front brake line for any cuts, bubbles, or bumps where are being frayed. Check the connectors for leaks and secureness. Check the disc brake assembly. There should be no cracks, dents, or holes, no loose or missing bolts, The rotors or pads should not be dangerously thin. The pads should be no less than 1/4 of an inch thick. Next, we'll check our front tire, rim, lug nuts, grease seal cap with bolts and valve stem. In checking my tire should have 85 to 95 psi in pressure. I would check the pressure with an air pressure gauge. There should be no less than 4/32 of an inch tread depth. It should be evenly worn. You may not have recapped or retreaded tires on the front. Both tires must be matching. Point to each side of the tire when you say this. I would check for any cracks, tears, rips, gouges, or bubbles, and that the rim is not embedded in the tire. The rim should not be bent, cracked, or broken. The grease seal cap should not be cracked, broken, or leaking, and the grease seal bolts and lug nuts should not have any rust trails which would indicate looseness. I would also check that there is no looseness in the bolt holes. My valve stem appears to be straight. There should be a dust cap present, and it isn't cracked, broken, or leaking, and all items on the tire system are secure. At the end you would say, I would check the tire system and items I've explained here on the other side of the bus the same way as this side. Now we'll move to the driver's side of the bus. We'll be checking our brake fluid reservoir, power steering fluid reservoir, and hose. In checking the brake fluid reservoir, we'll check that there is no cracks, breaks, or leaks, and all of the screws and bolts appear to be present and in place, securing it to the bus. Next, we'll move to the power steering fluid container and hose. We'll check that there is no cracks, breaks, isn't worn, and no leaks. We'll check with the engine on or off. Look on the side of the container for a measuring gauge. The fluid level should read between full and add. Check hose for cuts, cracks, leaks, bubbles, or bumps. I'd check to make sure that the screws and bolts were in place and the entire system is secure to the bus. Be sure to mention that the power steering unit is gear driven. Next, we'll check our transmission dipstick. I'd check with the engine on, warmed, and in neutral. The dipstick appears to be straight and is not cracked, broken, or leaking and is secure. To check, remove the dipstick, wipe it, reinsert it, and pull out again, and it should read between full and add. Next, we'll check the oil with the oil dipstick. We'll check that the dipstick is not cracked, broken, or leaking. The dipstick is checked with the engine off. The color is brown, and you would remove the dipstick, wipe it off, reinsert, and pull it out again, and it should read between the full and the add. Next, we'll be checking our steering column boot, steering column with U-joints, steering gearbox, pitman arm, drag link, steering knuckle, bolts, and cotter pins. We have 2 steering column boots. We'll check that the boots are not dry rotted and they don't have any cracks, cuts, or bubbles. We will also check that the clamps are in place and securing the boot to the shaft. The shaft is not cracked, broken, welded, worn, and the shaft should rotate but not bounce. The U-joint is not cracked, broken, welded, or worn and is well greased. Check that the steering gearbox isn't leaking and is well greased. Pitman arm, drag link, steering knuckle, bolts and cotter pins are not cracked, broken, welded, worn. Check that the gearbox and steering knuckle should be well greased. I would also check that to be sure all these items have proper screws and bolts and are secure to the bus. Next, you would say, I would check all the spring mounts, springs, shocks, tie rods and tie rod ends, brake hose, brake chamber, rotors, tire, rim, lug nuts, hub oil seal, and wipers the same as I did on the other side. As long as you missed nothing on the other side, this is acceptable. After this, you step back and look over the engine. Be sure that you have covered all the parts. If you feel that you've missed something, go ahead and cover that part. Then you close the hood. Once you close the hood, you cannot open the hood again. One more thing. Before closing the hood, remember to say that we have spare fuses located in the cabin of the bus in case we have a blown fuse. Next, we'll close the hood, secure the latches, and move to the passenger side of the bus for the external inspection.